Thank you, Madam President. I appreciate the opportunity to make a brief statement regarding a very special event that occurred in Southwest Michigan just yesterday. I had the pleasure of knowing Sister Mary Ann Rybarczyk, a nun in the Catholic Church, because of her years of service and teaching at the Catholic school that I went to, that my sisters went to, that my mother worked at, and that my children have attended. Sister Mary Ann retired after many, many decades. What I didn't know is that Sister Mary Ann, her brother, was a World War II veteran who never came home. As it turns out, when she was 14 years old on September 8th of 1944, Navy Reserve Aviation radioman Second Class Albert P. Rybarczyk was lost in a bombing run in World War II. That was some 2.5 years, just less than 2 years after Pearl Harbor, 2.5 actually after Pearl Harbor, and in fact, 42 days after Pearl Harbor, then high school graduate and Clark equipment operator Rybarczyk enlisted in the United States Navy to defend our freedoms, the freedoms that we love and hold so dear. It turns out that there are organizations across our great nation who do not want to leave those men and women who are lost in battle, who are lost at sea, and who are lost in service to our nation from coming home. Sister Mary Ann yesterday joined family members from that lost ship, an Avenger that went down in the Pacific off of Palau. In 2014, it was found that a portion of the aviation, the jet itself, it wasn't a jet at the time, but a portion of that particular aircraft, the Avenger bomber, was found. Later, in some additional investigation, it was found that 3 of the crew members of the 4 were contained within the wreck some 72 years later. Sister Mary Ann was then asked to give DNA samples. And I'm pleased to report that yesterday at St. Joseph Catholic Church, Sister Mary Ann Rybarczyk was able to welcome home her brother with full military rights and a full Catholic Christian burial. The school that she taught at for many decades was in fact there. My daughter was one of those in attendance at the Mass yesterday, as were so many others, veterans and individuals who wanted to pay their respects to a fallen hero some 73 years later. It really was a moving experience for every one of us, made all the more important and all the more blessed when you consider that 73 years later, Sister Mary Ann has her brother home for Christmas. So, Madam President, as we think about the blessings that we have in our lives, I think about the years of service that Sister Mary Ann provided to so many kids throughout the years, and that yet she carried with her the sadness of having lost her brother with no accounting and no understanding of where he may be, other than he enlisted for our freedoms. Yesterday, Sister Mary Ann Rybarczyk was able to welcome home Alfred P. Bud Rybarczyk, lost in service to our nation some 73 years ago. And today he is buried in the cemetery that, in fact, my father is buried in just 30 feet away. It is an honor for me to mention him to this chamber, a name that you may not have known, a name that I didn't even know Sister Mary Ann had lost, her brother. But here we are some 73 years later to say thank you, welcome home, and thank you for your service, Bud Rybarczyk. So, Madam President, if you wouldn't mind, perhaps we could pause for a moment of silence for Bud Rybarczyk, some 73 years later after serving our nation and giving the ultimate sacrifice to us and the freedoms that we love and hold so dear. And at the end of this particular statement, if my comments could please be included in the journal. Thank you.
Your comments will be printed in the journal. Members, if you'd rise for a moment of silence for Bud Rybarczyk.